Welcome to Loyola Marymount University and our forecast series for 2014. Today we have the pleasure of having John Deasy, Superintendent of LA Unified. He has been a superintendent in 3 other school districts and also, of course, worked for the Linda and Bill Gates Foundation. With us as well is the Dean of the School of Education. He was first promoted to being dean in 2005, and then as a disciplinary action, he was also made dean of the graduate school. So he's got a lot on his plate. These 2 gentlemen are probably 2 of the premier individuals when it comes to education in Los Angeles. Whether they like it or not, they're always on the hot seat because of the different boards that they sit on and the different decisions that they make. We have a lot to talk about, but before I get to some substantive questions, I just wanted to go a little bit in terms of the background of John Deasy. LA Unified, but first you were actually brought to LA Unified to work under a previous superintendent, and before that you worked with a foundation and previous school districts. And then, of course, you got your PhD from the University of Louisville. Okay, and so take us a little bit in terms of just your career path and the different places you were, beginning with the dissertation and then Santa Monica, Malibu.
Sure. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a proud dad of a graduate of this academy, so it's always very nice to come back here.
It's always nice when your children do a lot better than you.
Much, yes. Yes. And we're still paying for it.
Yeah.
Did my undergrad at Providence College in Rhode Island. I mean, born in Boston, grew up there in
We
Providence.
couldn't tell by the accent.
Couldn't tell by the accent.
Yeah.
I
Actually, I thought it was an East LA accent first, but
No. And then moved to New York City, was a teacher for a period of time, and then was a high school administrator. I was always in high school. And then became a principal, and was a principal in a number of high schools in New York. And if folks did their educational history, if you're in that part of the world, you might have come across something called the Coalition of Essential Schools, and Ted Sizer, who led that, and I was one of the first 50 principals of the coalition movement. Eventually moved to Rhode Island and accepted the first superintendency at a pretty young age, and have moved in that direction. That was in Rhode Island, and then from there got offered a job here in Santa Monica and led that school district for a period of time, and then was asked to come to a school district that surrounded Washington, D.C., Prince George's County, very, very, very impacted urban district, and did a whole bunch of transformational work around that piece. And then tried to make a difficult decision at that point of possibly working for the Bill and Melinda Gates or choosing to go into the administration. That was just the point where Obama had become president. And then chose to work at the foundation, and for 2 years made the investments in the United States on effective teaching, about $3.5 billion worth of the investments for the foundation. And then was asked to come here to Los Angeles and worked for Ramon Cortinez for about 6 months. And then I've been leading LAUSD ever since that.
So
just before I actually went into education, the first part of my work was criminal justice, and so worked in youth prison, and then left that and remained in education.
Sounds like you can't keep a job, just like...
It's all been pretty amazing.
Santa Monica, Malibu, 11,000 students. Prince George's, 125,000 students.
138.
138,
there, yeah.
Okay. And now LA Unified, 640 or even a little bit.
Have,
I never know the count.
Yep, 909,000 because we run all of the preschools and adult ed.
Oh. So tell me about the decision when you go to the Linda and Bill Gates Foundation. How was that conversation, and what appealed to you to, in a sense, leave the practice and go to a foundation?
It was a very aggressive offer to do this work, and the foundation at this point was going to begin its second set of investments, and they really wanted practitioners and folks who had significant positive experience in working with youth who live in circumstances of poverty, youth who struggled with opportunities that had kind of previously not been supported. youth who hadn't spoken English yet proficiently, and youth who are currently not documented. And so it was an opportunity to really shape a set of investments across this country, and it was a really remarkable experience.
And then the discussion when you come to Los Angeles, what was appealing about that, and how did that discussion go? Did they recruit you? Did they say, hey, you need to come here? Tell us about that.
So those conversations are usually kept private between the board and myself.
We're amongst friends.
I understand.
You want to educate, this group wants to be educated about how that happened.
We had a series of very good conversations about coming to LA, and at the end of the day, I chose to come to LA. There were some other situations. There were other school districts at that moment. We were trying to all figure out what would be the best place and where I'd want to be.
What appealed to you about LA?
It's very simple. LA is America only sooner, and we are coming to a hometown near you in this country.
Right.
What we look like, our struggles, our opportunities. There is no more important system in the United States. New York is slightly larger, but nowhere near as diverse. It doesn't actually look like America at the moment, and we do. And the other piece was, I think for me, there was profound affiliation with the issue of social justice in the city, of cities, Los Angeles, about youth who really historically have not been served well, and to do something seriously about that.
So
Pretty darn quickly.
what I want to do is kind of organize the rest of the topic around three things. Number one, and very quickly, and ask both you and Dean Martin, how is education today different than it was 20 years ago? And then the second is, how is it going to be different in 20 years? I think that's what we really want to focus on. But before we answer that second question about how is education going to be different in the future, talk about some contemporary issues like the Common Core and the new funding formula and the Guerra decision and of course iPads. So we'll talk about all those things.
I know, it's amazing when you think about giving students who had no voice and no technology the same thing that you would give white privileged youth. And I always love the reaction that I get when we
Are you sure you're not from East LA? It's just like the way he with the Boston accent, but the attitude certainly is from East LA.
So I remember really vividly this is a very simple matter for me, and that is what white privilege America gets for their kids. Every kid deserves. The issue in LAUSD happens to be that no one is like that, and so the scale is big. I promised, amongst the things that we did here is that every youth would have technology, and every youth would have access to technology, and every youth would have a device. Now, of course, you have to have that because there's no more paper and pencil state assessments in California anymore. But the notion of access and eradicating a digital divide, to me, is a no-brainer. What's fascinating, I'll never forget the very first day when the LA Times wrote this article, and they had this kind of beautiful picture of this little young iPad, and the article goes on, and then I don't really pay attention to media. I don't papers whatsoever. It's just not healthy. And so what you do is, someone pointed out, well, 7 to 8 people had posted comments the first day, and they were really horrific, despicable kind of comments. Things like, I am sure these iPads will end up on street vendors. Mexicans will be selling them when they're stolen. And then one was, this little girl should be managing her weight, not her technology. And it kind of was like this all along. And so I remember reading those, and I think that thing that struck me was that afternoon I had to meet with the leaders of all the high schools. We would have the student body president for every high school. I met with them, and I talked to them about this. I said, you know what? One reaction could be like you could then write a comment in with a lot of foul language that probably won't get printed. And that was probably one of my initial reactions. The second thing to me was you could be really angry. But at the end of the day, where I settled was, this is actually a really amazing response, because every single person posted it from an iPad or an iPhone.
Oh, there you go.
And what's it going to be like in this city when 900,000 heretofore silent voices have the same power as these? That, I think, has people very uncomfortable. And it's about time. So that's kind of how I thought about that.
So, education compared to 20 years ago, Dean Shane Martin. I've been here 29 years. Shane, I think you started either a year after or so.
Shortly after.
Yeah, and of course, he's an LMU grad. Then we sent him off to USC to get his doctorate, and also got a theological studies, something in Berkeley, and another master's here or there. Came back to the faculty, but if you think about the university in the last 20 years, it's been transformational, and the one unit that's been transformed the most is the School of Education. What has happened to the School of Education has just been phenomenal in the last 20 years, and this is the person, not only the visionary, but the practitioner, the one that made it happen. And so how does the School of Education look today as compared to 20 years ago? And more importantly, how does education look different in the last 20 years? And how do the students, when they leave LMU School of Education, how do they look different than they did 20 years ago?
Well, first of all, I also want to say it's great to be here with you all. Thank you for the invitation, and certainly to be here with John Deasy. You know, John is being very modest and humble about some things in his own background. I mean, he did identify himself as an LMU parent, and I'm glad he said a proud LMU parent. When John was the superintendent at Santa Monica, Malibu, he also was a faculty member for us as an adjunct faculty in our doctoral program, teaching a very popular course on education and social justice. And in addition to that, 2 years ago, John was a recipient of an honorary doctorate from LMU, just to...
My office.
I'm glad it's in your office. That's great.
Where else would it be? Like the garage or what?
No, it could have been at home.
Could have been
Okay,
at home,
okay.
right.
The office
Could have
is-
been at home. But really just to acknowledge, you know, the distinguished career you've had and the great work and really your leadership here in Los Angeles. You know, Fernando, as I reflect on the last 20 years or so in education, and particularly the School of Education here, I mean, you're right, we've grown by leaps and bounds. I mean, when I started here just about 20 years ago, we were, in the School of Ed, we were 300 graduate students, about 9 full-time faculty and 3 full-time staff. Today, we're over 1,500 graduate students and 120 faculty and staff, and have grown our programs quite a bit.
Wow, no wonder the rest of us don't get anything. It's just like,
Yeah, you know, I hear that a lot. But let me say that, you know, our growth was not in any way growth for the sake of growth. It was really a few things. It was our faculty coming together around a strategic vision. First of all, going for national accreditation in the mid-90s was a real turning point for us. Previously, we ran a set of programs that were somewhat independent and in many ways siloed from each other. And going for national accreditation required us to come up with a shared vision of who we were and what we wanted to be. And you know, that exercise, I think, really brought us together. And what we said was, we see ourselves at service to the city, to this community, for us also to our church and our Catholic schools. And when you take an institution and say we see ourselves primarily being at service, then all kinds of things open up. And for us, it was strategic partnerships, strong partnerships with LAUSD, partnerships with an array of charter schools, partnerships with the LA Archdiocese, and looking to, you know, how we could respond. A strong partnership with Teach for America as well. And I think the biggest part of our story has been being the type of School of Ed that wasn't beholden to rankings and some of these other things, but really said, how can we roll up our sleeves as a faculty and staff and with our students and get involved in the real world of schools? Not simply to sit up on the bluff on this great academic campus that we have, looking down at the city and study the problems, but to actively get involved in trying to find solutions for the challenges we have in education. That theory into practice, which of course is a real Jesuit axiom.
yeah. So 3 things that are different today than they were 20 years ago in education in Los Angeles or California. One, two, three.
Well, John certainly touched on one of the biggest ones, and that really would be technology.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years ago, certainly technology was there, but in no way was it in the hands of everyone as it is today. So I think that has changed things absolutely dramatically. Secondly, I would say, our demographics have continued to shift. And I mean, John talked about the promise and challenge of coming to Los Angeles as one of the most diverse areas in the country, and I would even argue in the world. I think that's so true. And the diversity is in so many ways. It's certainly around race and ethnicity and language, but it's even deeper than that. And in a place like Los Angeles, we see that diversity among first, second, third generation immigrants. Diversity in gender is so much more important now than it was 20 years ago. So many different ways that we think and talk about diversity. And then third, I think there's been some real changes just in schools and in structure and in the systems themselves, okay? So I will just focus on what I'm going to call the whole movement toward choice around options in schools. Some call this a school choice movement, but that label means a lot of things to a lot of people. But I think LAUSD in many ways has helped lead this because there are more options for parents and families and children than there were 20 years ago. I mean, when you look at traditional public schools, pilot schools, charter schools, magnet schools, there's such an array of options, to say nothing of private and parochial schools. But within the public sector, the choice that's there and what that brings to education is just dramatic, and we lead the nation in that.
Yeah. So I can understand in terms of technology how you can then build curriculum around that. I mean, I see Father Bob Welch out here who hired me in political science in 1984, and when I arrived in the fall of 1984 to teach, the political science department had 7 members. There was 1 computer amongst the 7 of us, and we would have to reserve to go in there and use it. And of course, you go to the political science or any department today, and now there's about 12 of us, but at our disposal are at least of something like 50 computers if you add our smartphones, which have much more capability than those first laptops or first desktops that we have. And so what I see, you mentioned technology, demographics. So the university, this institution, has invested millions of dollars in technology, and not only for teaching, but in terms of how you register and all that type of stuff. But in terms of demographics, where's the investment and where's the classes? And I think you guys are a leader in terms of the classes, but certainly I see the millions of dollars that LMU has invested in your #1 change technology. I don't see the dollars in terms of changing how we've invested in the demographic shift.
Oh, I think you're pointing out something that is really right on target. And, I talk about our diversity, but we still have too many kids as individuals and as members of groups, particularly subgroups, who are falling through the cracks. We know that our English learners, those who go home and speak a language other than English, are a large group in California that, in fact, aren't succeeding in public schools and therefore have the options in life that we'd like to see. The other group, in terms of our demographics, are children with disabilities that perhaps are just more thoughtfully identified today than they were 20 years ago, or perhaps have grown in numbers. I think the system is much more open to meeting their needs, and we're looking at ways that general education and special education can work together rather than to take children who are identified with special needs and send them off somewhere. We're now saying that inclusion is really the way we want to have our schools and also to have our society, and I think that's a huge step forward. But there's more challenges in meeting the needs of the diverse population than I think we're all able to deliver right now.
Yeah. I think we're in an incredibly critical time in Los Angeles in terms of reform in education. So looking at the 30,000-foot level, the Center for the Study of Los Angeles, which gratefully direct, we just finished a survey in the month of January. We interviewed 2,400 LA County residents. And we've done many surveys. And every single time we asked the question, what is the most important issue facing Los Angeles, facing your neighborhood, facing the city, facing the country, et cetera, always, number one is education. There is no greater consensus across the country, across different cultural groups, geographic, income levels, et cetera. All groups identify education as number one. And it's clear. Given that as a backdrop, there are these many things that are really converging as a mutually reinforcing effort right now as we speak. The Common Core, technology that we talked about, the new funding mechanism that the governor instituted, and then the potential of this court case where you were on both sides, we understand from the press. And so those four things have the potential to really change education. We've had this discussion about educational reform before. I do want to point out to the students, especially those in education, that in the archives of the university, in the archives of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles, we have the papers of LAMP, which stood for the Los Angeles Annenberg Metropolitan Project, which was a $500 million initiative to resolve the crisis in urban public school systems in the United States. Those papers of that effort are here at LMU. In addition, we have the papers of LEARN, the Los Angeles Educational Alliance for Restructuring Now. And those were two major reform efforts with a lot of money behind them. And I would argue they did a lot of good, they did some interesting things, but at the end of the day, they failed and they disappeared. And so it's interesting to study those reform efforts, and they're here at LMU for any of you who are interested in writing those papers. And there's a frustration that constantly we tried reform, and even before I would say it's completely implemented, a new reform or a new fad comes, okay? So these four trends that I just talked about, are those going to be real impacts, or are those just fads? I mean, what's your reaction to those?
A lot. So let me just take it piece by piece. One is you said that you had just finished this survey where the number one issue is education. So my response is, well, then fund it. I mean, if actually California thinks that's important, then do something about it.
No, people would say it's the number one thing the state funds.
It is not the number one thing the state funds. The number one thing the state funds is incarceration per capita. So this is a state that chooses to incarcerate rather than graduate. So I want to be really clear about this. It's $86,000 a year to keep a kid in jail, and it's $5,800 a year, $5,800 a year to put a kid through kindergarten.
Yeah, but those are per capita, but in absolute dollars, the state funds education a lot more when you consider the state and all the school districts combined.
As a percentage of its budget, not in New Jersey spends $24,000 a year on a child.
I'm not okay. I agree with you at the point. We don't fund let's make the point.
But this
we
is
don't
not
fund.
I was going to say it's not an accident.
Right.
You know, it's deliberate policies. You know,
Right.
we build. You know, we have a prison industrial complex in the state of California. We don't actually have an education. We have eroded that. So when people say that it's the most important thing, well, then do something about it. That would be my reaction to that piece. We, at the end of the local control funding formula, which is a way to distribute the funds versus how much money we're going to get, in 2018, we will be where we were in 2008. So I think we should be really clear about the
Per
fact that
capita
in
per student.
2018, we will fund students where we were in 2008. I mean, that's how far we sunk, and we're going to come back to a level that's kind of pitiful. So I think the second thing I would make the comment on was to kind of go back for a moment to the technology piece. I don't think people have any idea what's taking place in terms of technology and in this issue of access. So if I were making a prediction, I would say that the American high school in no less than 10 years is going to just lose the monopoly on the diploma. It just simply is not going to be the place that grants the diploma.
That's pretty radical.
It's happening before our eyes. Students walk in and they will say, okay, Mr. Guidance Counselor, here's my chemistry grades. And they'll say, no, you don't understand. Chemistry is in 217. And they'll go, no, I actually got chemistry at Yale online. And I paid, and I actually have a first-year chemistry course, and I was able to access that. And they're like, okay, kids are absolutely customizing a diploma, and it's not going to be the local high school. And so there is no question that the fact that the person who now gives you the diploma is really, within 10 years, not going to solely be
Okay,
the
so then,
institution.
how does LAUSD prepare for that, respond for that? How does the School of Education or a teacher respond and get ready for that? Because what you're talking about is pretty radical. I'm worried. Even though I have tenure, I'm not worried about what happens in terms of, you know.
I think the notion of hybrid learning and distant learning is very, very powerful. It is providing opportunity that just heretofore has never been available to students. So it's a huge opportunity to harness where you can leverage so that students get what others have not been able to get.
Right, but then it messes with the funding formulas and all of that, you know, in terms of the kid not being in that classroom, et cetera.
So I guess I have to ask, so does the child need to be in the classroom?
No.
Yeah, I think the question is, how do we provide an education for students, some of whom could advance so much more quickly, some of whom could receive much more individualized attention than we do now. So I think that there's a power to that. There's a dilemma to it as well, and that is, you know, school systems only know structure. You know, we regulate, we don't innovate. And so I think there's a real worry about this being seen as only along the fault line as jobs. So if kids can do this, then they don't really need us anymore. And I think that's kind of backwards, because the only way you open the door is for the youth. That's why we're in business, and to be help them. So we should, I mean, there's a way to talk about that, I think, a little bit more. I think that's important. I mean, I think an issue that is different. I mean, we were kind of talking about, you know, 20 years ago. Clearly, unless we fundamentally, as a country, come to wrestle and responsibly solve the issue of immigration reform, I think we're doomed. And I think we're doomed in public education first. I can't have 40% of my youth and their homes living a shadow life. It is not going to work.
So you're saying that 40% of the children at LA Unified are the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves?
They are, well, I'm not saying immigrants, I'm talking about not documented.
Yeah, undocumented.
Yeah,
Excuse me, that's what I meant.
undocumented.
Right.
So, one
That's
or the other.
that's a pretty high percentage.
One or the other.
Wow.
It's incredibly, it's the number one challenge I face, by far, more than poverty.
But I want the dean to kind of react to that great prediction that we're going to have you back here in 10 years to see that in a sense, this online possibilities and how that changes the schools, and not only the K through 12, but also universities and schools of education.
Well, I mean, I think John's absolutely right that 10 years from now, it will look so different than it does today. And you know, to build on what I talked about earlier, the growth in different models of education and delivery systems and that choice that's there, I think that's just going to continue. And technology, hybrid, and online learning will be a big part of that. And so I think in the end of the day, it's all about fit. And so for a lot of kids, that's going to be the best fit. And there'll be different forces. Some will be market forces, but there'll be other forces that'll help sort some of this out. You know, I was just reflecting on talking to this group, and you're all here as university undergraduates.
And there's some graduate students here, too.
There's some graduate
The
students.
dean of
here.
graduate school, right?
But you certainly all look very engaged and very youthful and very smart sitting in front of me. But when I was in the classroom not that long ago teaching, future teachers, one of the things I would often ask them is, you know, how many of you going through your K through 12 experience had instruction with technology as a primary method in which you received your instruction? And no one would raise their hand, no one. I mean, if I asked that question to you all today, how many of you, and I'll ask it, how many of you as you reflect back on your K-12 experience had technology as a significant part of your instruction? How many of you would raise your hand? So there's a good number, and I think every year that is going to change more and more. So my point in telling you this is, you know, you all are pushing us, and you're asking about, in the School of Education, well, our faculty, our staff, all of us, we have to change.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change. And so, you know, I mean, Fernando, as you said, you and I were roughly here at the same time. we didn't come here as professors trained in teaching with technology.
That's right.
We came here and the primary style was lecture. Well, that is, I mean, you'd all kill us if we just lectured at you today. So we've had to really retool and retrain around technology.
Right.
I think it's really telling. I remember speaking to an individual who was just out of college, and we were talking about this initiative in LAUSD around a one-to-one device plus digital content for every student. And I mean, to be honest with you, I was feeling proud. And I was like, you know, this is going to be the first district that actually is committed to making sure that income is not a barrier to this. And the person just goes, you gotta relax. This is not an innovation. You're just catching up to where kids are already.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that there's a lot to that.
Deflating, yeah.
So if we don't think technology is like ahead of us, sir,
Yeah.
you can order online your own private drone, and you can control it with your cell phone, and watched it happen last weekend. It is like it's perfectly able to do that, and you put it together, and it goes 1 mile above, and you can watch you ski, it can watch you surf.
Why don't you order 7 of them and have them follow the school board, each one of them, and then you can just...
But I'm just saying that this is moving, at huge leaps. And there's the obligation to have our youth prepared, and the obligation to make sure that they have access.
Common Core. Good idea, bad idea, how you're preparing the School of Education to graduate people that are going to be in that environment?
Well, I mean, Common Core is certainly something, as we know, not without controversy in this country.
So I said good idea or bad idea?
A good idea.
Okay, good. I thought he was going to go
no,
political on us and give us a...
I mean, the implementation will be one of the big challenges, but if we stop back and look at what we're trying to do in Common Core conceptually.
Well, first, do me a favor, because there's some students who are not education students. What is Common Core?
So it's an initiative from the Western Governors Association and superintendents at the state level across the country, in partnering with superintendents like John Deasy and others, to look at how we can have a Common Core approach at the state level to our standards. You know, the United States has never had anything close to a national curriculum, and this is not a national curriculum, but it's looking at how can we have a better alignment, and how can we truly be more innovative and update what we're doing in the classroom. So, yeah, jump in. Yeah, you can answer that.
So the National Governors Association asked the smartest thinkers in the United States to put together a set of standards that would be universal if your state had chose to adopt them. They were voluntary state standards, and that they would be absolutely aligned with the highest performing OECD countries in the world on PISA and TIMSS. And so these would be college workforce ready standards, and they would be standards that would be aligned to the top performing countries like Finland and Thailand, and Singapore and South Korea. And states voluntarily adopted them. California was one. So 46 states in the District of Columbia have adopted them in English language arts and mathematics. And we are rolling them out just like every other state at the moment.
Yeah, how's it going?
In LA and in California, I would, I don't want to jinx this. I would say that this has been a uniquely positive experience when I look across the country. I'm not sure why. I have some ideas why I think we've done this very thoughtfully. LA chose to do this 1.5 years ahead of the state. The state is doing this now. But this has been very, very positive. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's about time that all students had access to a curriculum. This is not a uniform teaching, it's a uniform curriculum, so that algebra in Maine, Mississippi, and Minnesota is algebra. And that just wasn't the case before.
But I think there's something embedded in this as an opportunity. You know, I'm reflecting on the last 20 or 30 years or so of instruction in the United States, and we had a lot of experiments with what I'll call direct instruction. So programs that sought to have a teacher-proof curriculum. In other words, you know, the experts would write the curriculum, and the role of the teacher was really to read
Just to implement it.
and to implement and facilitate, but there was very little higher order thinking, very little creativity, and what it did was it in many ways crushed the art of teaching, and veteran teachers really lamented that. I think what Common Core has a promise to restore to our teachers a whole approach that allows them to really teach based on context. So even though there's these standards across the country, context matters, and in fact, how to engage kids within the local context really matters. So there's room for teachers to augment that curriculum, to help to flesh out that curriculum. And I just think that's really exciting. I mean, Common Core points to critical thinking skills, to higher order thinking, versus just getting the right answer. And so, again, the implementation will be everything, but this is a great opportunity for us.
So, comment,
Would it help to do just a 30-second, like for those who might not know what we're talking about in Common Core, what it would feel like on the ground?
yes.
So everybody here had already left high school. And so I'll give two gigantic differences. Let's do English language arts K to 12. One of the fundamental differences that is taking place is that the curriculum was predominantly, if not almost completely, fiction. So you would have plays, and you would have poetry, and you would have novels, and you would have short stories, and the like across that. One of the major differences is that this is now balanced in terms of nonfiction text. And the other thing is that students would do much more close reading of much fewer pieces of text and write to a very complex, ill-defined prompt. So, for example, everybody would remember, I think, reading Stephen Crane, Red Badge of Courage. This would be fine to use that, but it would be a 2 to 3 day lesson on Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, on King's letter from Birmingham City Jail. So first source nonfiction text around that. And after using, like, for example, a typical 11th grade class would be 2 to 3 days on the Declaration of Independence and letter from Birmingham City Jail. And the question is, so how does the oppressed exercise power against the oppressor? And that is how you would write. So very different. Math, probably one of the great fundamental differences is algebra is not a discrete subject. Algebraic thinking is literally K-12. And the notion of algebra as a language and algebra as a representational language is included almost at every single grade level. Those would be two examples.
And that's just such an exciting environment for teachers. You know.
Right. So, Common Core, revolutionary, interesting, or a fad?
No, I think it has the potential to be revolutionary. Again, part of it depends on our rollout of it.
Yep.
But it could be a huge game changer. It really could.
I hope that being college workforce ready and competitive so is not a fad. I mean, our youth in
No, but,
Compton are not competing
the-
for jobs with other kids in Compton. They're competing with kids in China.
Yeah.
Inglewood is competing in India. This is actually a known fact, really important. Only will be revolutionary if we are able to support our teachers to teach in this way. If we're not successful at that, I think it has the potential to be a big problem.
Local control funding formula. Very unusual. The governor, kudos to him. I think it's one of his great accomplishments in his first term. Explain what that impact has on LAUSD.
I just want to double down on that. So not only do I think it's a great accomplishment, I do not believe that there is as a matter of fact, I know there's not another single state in the United States that has changed its funding formula in this way without a court order. So this is astonishing, I think, in California. So to put it at that level, there is no history of us doing something like that.
What's amazing to me is while there was a response against it, it hasn't really been I thought that there was going to be a uproar and all kinds of lawsuits and all that. Now, there's been some of that, but nowhere near what I expected. So explain to the students what we're talking about.
California has had 4 iterations of how it funds its schools, and I'm not going to go through that part. But in each one of those, it was an equality-based funding formula, meaning that you fundamentally give each student the same amount of money. Sometimes it was less, sometimes it was more, but wherever they live. So the kids in San Diego and kids in San Carlos received the same amount per student. And then you added on other programs and you funded those types of issues. That has been the nature of funding. Now, whether it came from property tax or after Prop 13, that's a different story. But the way you distributed it was what we call equality-based. The local control funding formula immediately turned this to an equity-based funding formula, which fundamentally means those who have the least get the most. And so the formula takes the pot of money. Forget for a second how much money goes into the pot. That's a different issue. But whatever pot it is that you're going to give to education, its distribution to the school districts of California, the over 1,000 of them, is now entirely different. And beginning next year, money will come to districts based on who and what the youth look like in your district. So there is a base funding amount that is the same for every single student. And then there is an additional amount of money for every student who does not speak English as their first language by count in the district. There is an additional amount for every youth who lives in a circumstance of poverty by count in the district. And there is an additional funding amount that comes to a district for every student who's in foster care. And then on top of that, there is the concentration factor. And so if you are a school district that has 55% or more of youth in any one of those categories, you get substantially more on top of that. And then you must craft your budget showing that how you distribute those funds fundamentally alters the achievement trajectory for those groups of students.
But this has created a burden for LA Unified because you have to show the state that every student has to be qualified under one of those.
I welcome that burden in a heartbeat. I think.
But it is a burden, right? It is no?
I don't think it's a burden. I think it's an obligation.
Right.
I don't think it's a burden. I think that it is about time that we recognize that youth who do not have, who live in circumstances of challenge, fundamentally need more support.
Mm-hmm. So how does, in dollars, how much more will that mean for you when it's fully implemented?
So it's important then to say, we talked about how it gets distributed. The state of California, in another historic, passed Proposition 30, which basically said, we're going to have a supplemental tax across everybody. There'd be a fraction of sales tax, a fraction of income tax, and that is going to create new money, and all that has to go to education.
And that just happened, that
And that just
Proposition
happened.
30, another Governor Brown initiative.
That's right. So it will sunset. It's only 7 years. But for those 7 years, more money will come to education, and then it has to go out that way. So at the end of the day, we have been, so LA Unified it's big. So try not to focus on the number, but try to get the percentage. So our annual budget is approximately $7 billion without construction. That's my responsibility on an annual basis.
So that's the operating budget of
That's
$7 billion,
operating.
not the capital budget, which is for building
That's a
schools.
different one.
Right.
In the last 3 years before this year, we cut $2.7 billion out of the budget. And because we just lost the money from the state. We don't tax like other school districts around the country. You only get what the state gives you around this. So we'll begin adding money back into the budget, but when it's done, we will be at the level we were in 2008.
Right.
So I think it's great. I just don't want to have any parades, and this is not ponies and rainbows. I mean, this is like a really serious problem about our decision to fundamentally not fund public education in the state.
So let me switch quickly. Vergara versus California. Students matter. Explain to the students what the lawsuit is about, okay? And then there was an article written about you as a witness.
Yes, I was on the stand for 3 days.
Yeah, so first, what is the lawsuit about?
Sure.
Why were you a witness, and what did you say?
Okay. So I'm not going to be able to discuss my own testimony because I am not dismissed from the case yet, and I've told the media that I'll be glad to discuss that when the case is done. So that's just the reality of the situation. I'm not sure you can overestimate the importance of this particular lawsuit. So I could talk
Is
about
LA
that.
Unified party to the lawsuit?
We were a party to it originally. I was sued originally in the case, and then the district was dropped, and now it's purely at the state matter. So there's been a series of lawsuits in LA in the past 3.5 years, and they have been pretty fascinating. The first was Reed, the second was Doe versus Deasy, and the third has been Guerra, which was versus Deasy, but now it's just versus the state.
Isn't that great that your name gets thrown around like that you're part of history, that, you know?
So I think in
He's,
terms
he's,
of,
he's ignoring me.
no. I think what is happening is that we're realizing that for a long period of time, possibly as long as education's been around, everything mattered but students' rights. And I'm not saying that those other rights shouldn't matter. They absolutely should matter. But you just can't have an organization whose only purpose is to actually work with students when those rights are not actually taken into account. So in Reed, what took place was when you have to cut your budget, you have to lay people off. And when you lay people off, the state of California, like almost every other state, says you do that in order of inverse seniority. So the teacher who was just recently hired or the last in is the first to be cut. So you actually have to lay people off based solely on their seniority number, and all the other factors you can't, like how well they do their job, you can't take into account.
And that's
Schools
because
in
of,
LA
that's because of union contracts?
No,
or-
it's
or
because of state law. Yep.
Okay.
In schools in LA, they're in the most impacted areas, very, very high poverty, high impact areas. These school districts are school districts where the overwhelming majority of the faculty are the youngest teachers. So when layoffs would come, these schools with the kids in the greatest impact would see 60, 70% of the faculty just wiped out, and you'd have to start over. And that would happen year after year. So we got sued, saying that that was a problem. And forget the whole trial, went through the trial, testified, so forth and so on. The judge found, in a stunning decision, that students have a constitutional right to stability. This wasn't about the quality of education they were getting. That is like, you just can't do that. And so the Reed case created schools where you had to skip over those schools. It's still on appeal. Second one was...
Who's appealing?
The teachers union. Yep. So the second lawsuit was Doe versus Deasy, and that was asserting that the district for years had not used measures of student achievement as part of evaluations for teachers. And then the judge said that actually you had violated the law and you had to do that. So in other words, the teacher evaluation system that we put in was found to be actually be valid. It's on appeal.
Yep.
Okay.
And who's appealing that?
That would be the teachers union.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the third issue is this lawsuit which came out, which is Guerra. And Guerra basically sued 3 school districts, the governor, the attorney general, the state superintendent of instruction, and the districts on behalf of 8 plaintiffs. Some were LAUSD students, that basically said that there are 4 laws which are unconstitutional to students. And those laws are the very short period of time in California that a teacher gets tenure. Not that the teacher shouldn't have tenure, but that you basically have to decide in 14 to 16 months if you give a teacher a job for life. How you dismiss a teacher for incompetence or malfeasance or immoral behavior. The last in, first out as a law, and the constitutionality of how much it costs to do those things. And this trial is ongoing. It's been ongoing for 2 weeks. It's what you call, I don't know if anybody in the room is in the legal end of it or the law department. It's a bench trial, which means there's no jury. So it's very much like the Supreme Court. You argue in front of a judge. The judge can argue with you. You're on the stand. He can actually direct questions to you. And this is ongoing, and it's a very significant trial.
Did the judge argue with you?
The judge asks questions. No, he doesn't argue with me. He may argue with a lawyer.
Okay.
But he directly turns and asks you questions.
Yeah, but this was public, right? The press was there and all that.
Oh, everybody, it's a public trial. All trials are public.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the press characterized your testimony as being like on both sides. that both sides, that they were asking you questions and you were being positive on both and negative on both. Is that a fair characterization?
No, I don't think that's a fair characterization. I think a single article by the LA Times attempted to address that issue. I mean, the press, this has been covered by every media outlet in the United States. So what I think the paper was trying to say was that both sides want to use my testimony to support their case. So those who are the plaintiffs, the testimony is that these laws have done harm, which parenthetically I believe they do. That's an accurate testimony. The defendants believe that, well, they would argue that the way I've been running LAUSD shows that the laws work. You are dismissing teachers and so forth and so on. That's how I think how they
Right.
they tried to do that.
But you have dismissed more teachers than the previous superintendents combined in the last,
Well, the data would say that that would be an accurate fact.
so you have figured out how to fire people. Vergara.
No, it's not, let me just make the statement about that outside the case.
Yes, this is outside the case for any of you lawyers out there.
It's really clear. You don't have to be a criminal to be dismissed from teaching. So, let's just, people do bad things. That's just the nature of it. Some people do bad things. Many, many people do amazing things. So if you sell drugs on the side and you get arrested, you can have your license pulled and not be a teacher. That is not the threshold to remain employed. If you don't know how to teach algebra and no one learns in algebra, that actually is inappropriate to be a teacher. So there's incompetence and effectiveness, and then there's immorality, etc.
Right.
That is not the standard. The standard is, do youth learn around that piece? So I think that's a piece of it. And then I think the second part of this is, I make this, I believe this, I make this sacred bargain. I take money off of people's kitchen table in the form of tax dollars, most of whom parents are like, cannot afford to give it to us, and convert 89% of that to the salary and benefits employees, and the quid pro quo is the students will graduate college and workforce ready. All of them. Every kid in LA, they want to be you. That's what they want to be. They want to sit in this seat. They want to graduate. They want to go into post-secondary, have a meaningful employment, health benefits, a roof over their head. We take that really seriously, and the kid has a right to be successful in that.
Well, I got part of a solution, just hire LMU grads, and you'd always have competent teachers.
We disproportionately hire LMU grads, and that we can say on the record, because the data would support, and particularly this isn't a TV ad, but the work you all do around administrator support and preparation, it rocks. It's really good. It's really good.
Is that a metric, rocks? Where does that, is that, oh, okay.
It's a category.
Yeah.
It's a category of extreme effectiveness.
Dean Martin, Vergara, assuming that it's upheld, that the judge rules on the favor of the students, it's pretty revolutionary.
Again, it's another one of those occasions that I think is a big game changer. I think it's interesting to step back and consider the political process here. Change is hard in general, but change in this arena is extremely hard, because when it comes to public education, there's an array of stakeholders, and the agendas are multiple, and they're not always aligned on what's best for our youth and our children. And I think John spoke to that very, very clearly. If we look back at the last 100 years or so in the political process in the United States, think of how major changes have happened. Many of them have been through key court cases. In the education realm, we can go back to 1947, and we can think of a few key things that happened there. Mendez versus Westminster, which those of you in Chicano studies, I think, would be very, very familiar with. That was a ruling that said, segregation of Mexican and Mexican-American children is not constitutional, yet not much really changed. And then we move a decade or so later to Brown versus the Board of Education. a national ruling on segregation that laid the groundwork for, I think, much of the civil rights movement and very important change that happened in society. Certainly, there were other big court cases along the way that happened in the 60s. You know, the Tinker case, which really ruled that students, in fact, have a constitutional First Amendment right, and you know, previously that wasn't in consideration. The superintendent mentioned Reed. That was just another big game changer. In recent memory, United States versus Windsor, you know, on the Defense of Marriage Act and the definition of marriages in California. So
We should just point out that the trial team for this case is led by a senior lawyer. That lawyer is Ted Olson. Ted Olson is the plaintiff's lawyers. He, of course, defended Prop 8 successfully. He also was the lawyer for Gore v. Bush. He was Solicitor General of the United States. Give you kind of a sense that, like, this is not your average legal team.
no, it's a great point. And I think one of the reasons why it gets complicated, because when you look at the convening interests around education, particularly in Sacramento, you've got the interest of the state teachers union that sees themselves in a particular position to protect their membership in certain ways, and that puts a lot of pressure on the legislators to act or not to act. So I think that it's significant that it's court action that's moving these things forward. I think this could really blow up a lot of sacred cows and could be a huge game changer.
So we've talked about Vergara, local control funding, the Common Core, technology, all of these things are converging. And then we had this 2020 commission. And here's what they said about education. Quote, "Our public school system is failing our children and betraying the hopes of their hardworking parents. This year, LAUSD will spend $7.1 billion to educate close to 640,000 of our young people. But a recent survey found less than 60% of LAUSD students graduated from high school. For every 100 LAUSD students who entered ninth grade, just 32% will complete the course requirements to enter UC or Cal State system. How will they compete in a globalized economy in which education and income are linked?"
He's wondering what's the question.
What's your reaction?
I think you're entitled to your own opinion, just not your own facts. So,
I was just quoting that. That wasn't me. I wasn't making up those facts.
no, I'm
Oh, okay.
responding to that. I mean, I did the respectful thing and phoned the authors and said, I mean,
But
it's
isn't-
great
okay.
to do a report. It's a shame you actually never spoke to anybody in LAUSD, which they did not.
Don't you get tired of LAUSD being the one that always gets, it's so easy to pick on you, LAUSD, or people constantly, you know, on the one hand, we talked about how education is number one on everybody's priority, but yet every time you bring up LAUSD, there's sort of like, oh yeah, they're not doing it right, et cetera. And this was a lot of very significant LA leaders wrote this up and considered it the probably one of the number one issues facing Los Angeles.
So why did they then decline to make any recommendations?
They say they're forthcoming. They'll be
No,
coming.
they actually said that they will not be making recommendations on education.
Oh, on education.
Yeah, transportation, sure, and all the other stuff. Listen, the reality is LAUSD was just released in the National Assessment of Education Progress as the #1 most improved public school system in the country. We had never been in that place before in every one of the categories. So the greatest growth in youth who are African American, black diaspora, in reading and math. Greatest growth for youth who are Latino. Greatest growth for youth who live in circumstances of poverty. So, great. I think that's exactly where we should be, and we're incredibly proud, but we're not satisfied. The 3 data points are inaccurate, and so we try to point that out. We can help you get accurate data, but if you want to draw sweeping conclusions on that, then I'm only really going to participate in discourse if you know what
Okay,
you're
so
talking
what
about.
are the 3 data points?
Well, read it again.
We'll spend $7 billion.
No, that's not true.
Okay,
We cut 2.7 billion out of the budget. We forgot that part. Okay, next.
so you'll spend you'll spend $5 billion.
We'll spend close to 6.
Okay. close to 640,000
There's
students.
909,000 students in LAUSD.
Okay, but K through 12.
K through 12, we're responsible for birth to 26.
No,
I mean,
but
that's what that
how
budget
m-
funds.
Correct, but how many students are there in K through 12?
About 760,000. We're
Wow,
responsible
that's-
for 128,000.
That's more people
charters.
than live in San Francisco.
It's more than 7 states.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, it's incredible, but keep going.
Okay. That found less than 60% of students will graduate from high school.
The high school cohort graduation rate is 67%.
Okay, so why, well, the 32% entering the ninth grade will not complete the courses required for UC or Cal State system.
How would they know that if they haven't finished the year yet? I mean, I
Okay.
think that's probably one of the more troubling things. That's not a statistic, that's a projection. How dare you tell what my youth may or may not be able to do?
So this is incredible that I think we need to send them back to school and have them take,
No, I think you were right. These are very thoughtful.
I mean, there's some of our
leaders.
big civic leaders. Yeah, yeah.
And I respect every one of them. That's the beauty of kind of this democratic society. You can have the right to disagree, and you can provide evidence why you're disagreeing. You don't just kind of say, well, that was a kind of crappy report and walk away. LA has got enormous issues and enormous opportunities. Education's one of them. Let's just be clear about what we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, well, no, in terms of preparing for this, I read this expecting to have some interesting questions, and there was like nothing there. But it's still kind of interesting, and I think it would get you upset, so that's why I asked it. So it was like,
I think that's when you do my job, what gets you upset is meeting hundreds of kids who live in cars every day. What makes you upset is that kids die every day because of a damn tooth infection that becomes sepsis because there is no dentist. What makes you upset is abject poverty and the inability of the system to do something about that with the dollars it has. That gets you upset. This is, we live in a free country.
yeah. So in preparing for this, this was my favorite quote about you. LA Magazine?
It's
John-
it's an unfortunate byproduct of living in this city. There's it's kind of like people just want to talk about you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, as opposed to the work.
Man,
I've never seen
people
anything like
pay
it.
millions of dollars to have PR agents talk about you. You get a lot of free coverage.
That's the problem. Okay, go ahead.
John Deasy is either visionary or delusional, a savior or a Soviet-era throwback. That's awesome. So,
Yeah, I got
So,
I got two observations. One is that magazine is published in English only.
okay.
Number one, okay? Number one observation. We speak 109 languages in LAUSD. I translate everything every day into 8 languages when we go home. No dissing, it's a beautiful magazine.
Yeah, I like the pictures.
Okay? But a monolinguistic magazine in a city where you can't travel across the city and drive a car if you can't speak at least 2 languages? First observation. Second is, it's a piece.
Actually, the question was going to be to Dean Martin. Is he visionary or delusional? And is he a savior or a Soviet-era throwback?
And if you say delusion, I get free help with the language model.
Well, and the media have talked about our superintendent with a lot of other phrases as well.
Some of them we can't use here.
Some of them we
Okay.
probably can't use
No,
here.
we're a
And-
Catholic
and-
university. We can cuss and drink and do anything. It's not... Right, Father Welch?
But I mean, and some of that is John referenced being in LA and, near Hollywood and the way that all that plays out. But I think by and large, they just get it wrong. And what I think, John gets accused of being driven and focused and relentless. But what I see when I work with John, and I want to say it's just a great privilege to work with John, is someone who, first and foremost, is just passionately concerned about our youth and particularly about social justice and inequities in our society. And this isn't just rhetoric. this is someone that truly believes and eats and sleeps and dreams about a different Los Angeles and a different America, and sees that public education can be a vehicle to get there, but we need to do some fundamental work. And when you're looking at the kinds of statistics, and not just statistics, but John talked about children that live in cars and children that die from getting an infected tooth, and that's the reality. The person that sits in his chair should be relentless and driven, and should not in any way ever accept the status quo like happens too often. And so far from using any of that language to describe John, I mean, I think he's courageous and very much a hero, and Los Angeles is very much in his debt, and we're fortunate to have a superintendent with that kind of vision.
So then why is the school board constantly threatening to fire him?
Well, as I said earlier, there's a convergence of agendas and interests, and it gets complicated. I mean, it's adult agendas at times versus the really clear agendas of children, particularly those who are marginalized and live in circumstances of poverty. And when you put yourselves first and foremost saying that will be my agenda, you're gonna rub shoulders with different agendas.
Yeah. Should I ask you why are they always trying to fire you?
Hey, it's like this. I do not do this job to keep this job. I do this job to be singularly non-distracted from the fact that the purpose is to lift youth out of poverty. End of story. If you want to be down for that, we have got 1,000 ways to help. If you do not, then get 4 votes and move along. Otherwise, there is far too much at stake. And I think words like hero and stuff like that, that's like missing the entire point. The entire point is, if you are given unearned privileged in your life, you end up with 2 choices. Make sure no one takes it away, or make sure others have it. And I think that is the way that we in this team have thought about this work around that. I serve at the pleasure of 7 individuals. The majority vote makes the decision. That's the way it works. Like, I just try to get distracted by that. It's very distracting.
We are at Loyola Marymount University having a conversation with Superintendent John Deasy and Dean of the School of Education, Shane Martin. I am going to ask 1 or 2 more questions, then I'm going to turn it over to the students to ask your questions. First question, I talked about these 4 topics, Vergara, local control funding, the Common Core Technology Initiative. What else should we be talking about? What are the other important issues facing LA Unified? What's at the forefront of what's going to shape education in the next 10, 20 years?
So several. One is, like, your comment about, like, it's so easy to pick on the big guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely true. What gets missed in all of this almost all the time is we have, like, astonishing teachers. I visit schools every day. I teach on occasion, and I am mostly, my jaw is on the ground at the quality of teaching in really difficult circumstances. And we have just, sometimes we just really miss the fact that there is amazing instruction. These aren't just kind of, I'm not a person who uses those words a lot, so I'm like very serious about that, and incredible leadership. And so, I mean, I think the worry I have is how will we sustain a teaching force going forward? So the quality of teaching and those who are going to come into this profession, because we're going to see in the next, you said 10 years, a large number of individuals, very substantially large number of individuals who are prepared to retire. And they have to be replaced because our student body is not going to go away. And that is like a gigantic issue for me to be very concerned about. I think a second issue is, while I think if you look 20 years ago, diversity was talked about, I believe LA has helped this country fundamentally shift from seeing diversity as basically a deficit conversation to a powerful attribute conversation. And I think the way that we will work both around student voice and community voice to continue the power of a diverse community is going to be critical. We will teach this country, or not, around that issue. And I think that's going to be incredibly important. And I'll say this one more time, because I don't think anything faces me as much that will have the impact on education is whether or not we will actually get comprehensive immigration reform right in this country.
Dean, what else should we be talking about?
Well, you know, schools of education have a very important relationship with the field, with K-12, and then when you extend it to pre-K, and then, you know, continuing education, all of these kinds of things. And so some of the changes and opportunities and challenges that LAUSD is dealing with, our challenge, which is also opportunity, is how will a school of education respond? So teacher quality, John just mentioned that there's going to be a big turnover of teachers in LAUSD. That's going to be true across the state. So who will step into those roles and who will prepare them? That is historically what schools and colleges of education have done. I actually think, not unlike what John suggested, that the high school in 10 years is going to look different. I think schools of ed are going to look different. And I don't think if you will, the monopoly on owning the credentialing process is going to stay in schools of education. I think there's going to be a lot more choice and different opportunities. And while that stretches all of us, I think in the end it could be a good thing. So we have to think about the future and how will we position our school of education to continue to be relevant, not just relevant, but to be a leader in preparing quality teachers, high-performing administrators, who in fact will meet the needs of schools of the future.
If there are any questions, we can raise your hand. I think we have a mic over here. And while we're getting, the mic, actually we have the mic over here, but someone's going to move it over while we do that. While we're doing that, Shane, I'm going to give you a magic wand, and then you're going to pass it over to the superintendent. If you had one swipe of this wand, one reform that you could make in education, what would that be?
I'd start with funding for schools, and I would look at a way to dramatically increase funding for our schools in California. I mean, there's some a lot of issues still related to Prop 13 and, you know, our funding formula, but we're not talking about enough money to begin with, and so that's what I would fundamentally try to change.
Superintendent?
It's very hard to choose one thing.
You only have one swipe of the wand.
I know. So I probably would say universal, truly universal preschool. That would be it.
My name is Brianna. I'm a political science major. Dr. Guerra is my favorite professor of all time, of course.
You got an A.
My question is actually really relevant to what you just addressed. The OECD has published reports saying that children who attend high-quality ECEC programs fare better throughout their lives, specifically doing better on PISA tests at age 15. What is LAUSD doing specifically, or are you doing any outreach to preschools or Head Start programs to kind of help that transition into kindergarten?
And you run some of those.
Yeah, I was
right?
going to say, first of all, it's a really important question. Let me just take us back for a second. We don't determine preschool. California is slots that are given to a district. And so we'll run as many as are given to us. It is, because it's a state-funded system. So that's why what we do is anything that's given to us, we run it. We would advocate that we expand it for all, but we're nowhere near that. So mostly, we're a legislative lobbying on that issue. So the preschools that we run it's unquestionable, statistically significant, that students do much better, K1 and 2, much better if they come through preschool.
My name is Brahim Adwani. I'm a senior political science student. And my question today is, I understand that curriculums have to do a lot with the national and the state level, but how do you compare our American school curriculum to school districts outside of America, like in Europe and the Middle East and Asia? Like, many of those students learn advanced mathematics and advanced science before they even reach high school, whereas our students are struggling to pass like a physics class in high school. Do you think that's part of the problem in education in America? Or is it more the will of the student to perform and not having the opportunity to perform at a maximum potential.
Are there best practices in other nations that we should think about and adapt, or is it just cultural?
Let's just take the top 5 performing OECD countries around that. The curriculum is you can't compare. I mean, ours is woefully less rigorous. So I think you're spot on in your first observation. The Common Core state standards are what has jump-started this to move us to way much more a rigorous curriculum. This entire country is going to have a come to a senses moment, like really soon, when we take a look at what a student in 4th grade is expected to do and in 8th grade and 10th grade compared to what they're expected to do now. So I would say that the move to the Common Core is exactly what will level the disparity in your first question, and we're going to have a lot of work on our hands to get there. The second part of your question has been debated a long time, and very recently through a lot of research in the universities across this country. So are there what we would call non-cognitive, although it's probably the less useful term, but it's the one of art at the moment. Are there non-cognitive skill sets that we see in cultures or not see in cultures, such as persistence, such as grit, such as tenacity, such as the notion of pride associated with product? And they have been found in other cultures to be demonstratively more observational than in what we would say kind of the U.S. public schools around that. Kind of jury's out on how to teach those, but we know that their use in classrooms matter enormously in students being successful.
And I would just add one other thought on this question related to the Common Core. I think there's evidence that in many of the countries where there's not only a rigorous curriculum, but there's a lot more depth in particular subjects. So one of the things that's characterized education in the United States has been we cover a lot of things superficially and we move on. And the Common Core, and the superintendent mentioned this earlier, one of the things that it will focus us on is going into greater depth. So fewer things that we're trying to master at once, but much greater depth and more time on task. And I think we see that in very high-performing countries, Japan, Taiwan.
A classic example is, I mean, any high school we're obsessed with, the famous battles in the Civil War. And yet no one can get their hands around the fact as to why has this republic survived longer than any other republic post a Civil War. And I think that understanding that is probably more important than knowing the potential number of people who were killed at Bull Run. And so that is a huge difference in the notion of curriculum.
Thank you. Next.
I'm gonna lower this a lot. Hi, Valerie DeSanto. Honored to have you both here, and my favorite professor, Professor Guerra, obviously.
And she's not even enrolled right now, so I can't give her a grade. Okay? So, but next semester you got an A already, okay?
Oh, perfect. So my question for you both is, I look around the city of LA, and like you said, you look beyond the bluff, and that's what our education program is doing, trying to connect that divide. But I look at like the best universities in LA, obviously LMU, UCLA, USC. What programs do we have that we can all get connected, that we can all help LAUSD? What can we be doing? Because I know you said you wish you had funding, or is there anything that we can do, maybe volunteer, that we don't need as much funding? Or we have some of the best universities. How do we bridge the divide between our universities and LSUSD? Is there anything that we can do? Is there anything we're doing that we can get involved after today?
Yeah, I would tell you instantaneously a transformational opportunity I would gather for you and for us would be that if every single solitary student at the academy connected with a youth, even so much as once a month in your 4 years, you would have a profound effect in LAUSD, a profound effect. Kids can't imagine being you unless they can see themselves as you. And this notion of like, you got into university, you're successful at university, and you care enough to come back and actually work with the youth and help them understand that that is possible for them, it doesn't cost a dime.
And just to build on that, I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do in the School of Education is create concrete opportunities so that you can take your desire and really operationalize it. And the one that comes to mind right now is our LMU Family of Schools initiative, which is anchored at Westchester High School, our local public high school, you know, a mile or so down the road, but one that serves a very diverse service area. And in fact, what we do through the Family of Schools is we have our students, undergrad and grad, serve as tutors, mentors, to help with resumes, to help talk through the college experience, you know. As the superintendent said, you know, there's students just in that high school that don't have anyone in their family that went to college. And so to even think about that, it's just not in their daily experience. But a meaningful relationship with one of our students could change their life. So look for the LMU Family of Schools. We have all kinds of opportunities to tutor and mentor and volunteer, and we would welcome that.
Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Isley Hall. I'm a senior studying Spanish and political science. And you mentioned that a lack of comprehensive immigration reform is like one of the biggest problems facing LAUSD. And so I was wondering, what are some of the particular expressions of that? And then how do you as a leader navigate that? And then also, what do you think are some necessary elements of comprehensive immigration reform?
It's a great question. So some of the particular manifestations of the problems around that are parents and or students who will not come and participate in school for outright fear of identification and possible deportation. Won't participate in filling out forms because they will just assume we're part of the government, and those forms will be turned over to INS or ICE. Other manifestations are the decision not to participate in all the services that we give to help, because they'll be seen as you'll know I'm not documented, and you then might actually turn me out. We saw in the last 2 years more deportation of youth and families than we had seen in like the past 4 before that. So these are not unfounded fears. Some ways that we do that is that we have and fund a parent center at every single school, which are staffed by parents who go through a course and are trained around the idea of going out to homes and helping people understand that when you fill out the lunch form, that we don't need your social security number, and you don't need a social security number, and we don't care. So we have a universal policy in LA. We don't ask for your social security number ever on anything to do with LAUSD. It is to create an environment that you are safe. I don't care what your immigration status is. I don't care what your residency status is. I care that you actually live in that apartment or in that house or in that car, and you come to school, and we'll take care of you there. Having people believe that that is safe is like one of the greatest problems we have. What do we mean by comprehensive immigration reform? So I'm not going to get into the whole politics of the language around that. If you were brought here, you get to stay here. Okay? If you were taken here by an adult, it's not your choice to have done that. And so that is a big issue for youth around that. For parents, I mean, I'm a person who believes there has to be a way for that current workforce to find a way for permanency and legitimacy, and to do that in the most dignified way possible. And we could have the gigantic politic debate on that issue, but in a nutshell, I'm just trying to explain that there is the overwhelmingly documented notion of contributing through payroll as a documented citizen is an automatic tax investment in the country. So I say that like there would be people who disagree with that, but I know that they do. So I think those are two really important issues.
And I'd like to add one other, and it is the ability to access the political process. And so when you think about those without documents who in fact can't vote, can't participate, they have no voice in choosing their board representatives and choosing their mayor and choosing, you know, their governor. and yet the people that are in those roles will make huge decisions that will affect them. And I think that's just a really important issue here.
But
Who speaks for you when you don't have a voice? I mean, it's a pretty chilling issue.
there is deferred decision now, so that at least undocumented children at LAUSD are not supposed to be deported. Now, they're still in fear because their parents could be deported,
That's
et cetera.
correct. That's
So
correct.
have you guys set something up where if the parents of a child at LAUSD gets deported, what does the teacher do or what have you when they have nowhere to go home?
It's only if they'll tell us. And then if they do, we have ways to intervene and support that. But almost never do they tell us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christy, and I'm I'm a graduate student, a secondary bilingual education. And this is a kind of a two-part question. You mentioned,
Fantastic.
Because you're bilingual.
yes.
Two-part.
We
so
will
you-
leave the job application before
Thank
you
you.
leave. I think.
Well, you mentioned, this has actually to do with that. You mentioned how there are going to be many slots that will need to be filled by quality teachers.
Yes.
First part is, how do you define a quality teacher? And as a future teacher, what steps can I take so that I can make sure that I stand out from the other applicants? What credentials should I need? What classes or what skills should I obtain in the process?
So we try to be very clear about this issue of quality and effectiveness, and I would say rather than trying to explain it to you, which I could do, but it would take a little bit of time, go on our website and download the performance appraisal system. And it lays out very clearly what are the skill sets that are effective and highly effective that we look for through classroom observation, through contribution to the professional environment, to engagement with home, and to contribution to student learning gains. And that's laid out there. It's called the framework for teaching. The second thing is, I think the ability to speak a second language is powerful in an application and in working in LAUSD. Another thing that is powerful, for example, is you will obviously have a subject matter, but you will also have a bilingual degree in back of you in teaching that. That's incredibly important. I mean, that's already making you going to stand out. And then I think developing a proficiency for cultural literacy is really important. And the more you can speak specifically about a school, so before you apply, go visit some schools and and enter those examples into your interview process, and you'll do really well.
How many? Oh,
Give
I'm sorry.
my resume now?
Yes, please.
So, by the way, I'm an LAUSD grad,
Where'd you graduate from?
Franklin High School.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I was a bilingual teacher. Yeah, in the 5th grade. What would happen is every time an immigrant kid came, they would sit him next to me, and so I did all the translating, etc. So I've been a teacher since 13.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm serious about that.
I know.
I was bilingual education
Thank
at
you.
Yorkdale Elementary School.
Wow.
So, how many teachers are there at LAUSD?
So we have approximately 38,000.
And then how many do you hire every year because of attrition and all that?
Okay, so attrition takes place in 3 ways. Some people retire. Others move. You'd be surprised the number of families who have family in the military here in Southern California, and that's a pretty large chunk of attrition onto that. And then others just simply move in and out of the profession. So if you add all of those together, there's probably 2,000 to 3,000 teachers are hired a year.
So we want to thank Dr. Deasy, a alum of the university with his honorary degree, and you can see why we gave him one. Thank you. And we will see you guys here next week.